This is the 34th time I'll speak.
The president went on national television and denied a secret deal. 10 days later, he admitted it was true.
In dealing in arms with Iran, there have been also private merchants
and secretly sold weapons to Iran, a country it had publicly called an enemy. The money from those sales didn't go to the US Treasury. It went straight into a war the government wasn't even allowed to fund, an illegal war in Nicaragua, against a government Congress had specifically banned them from fighting. When a newspaper exposed it, the president went on TV and denied the entire thing. 10 days later, he came back and admitted it was true.
Plenty of room left over.
14 people were eventually charged.
There's shipments, and we know this is
Documents were shredded to hide the trail.
Countries that have been dealing in
And
arms.
somehow, almost nobody talks about it today. To understand how this happened, you need two separate problems the US government had in the 1980s, on opposite sides of the world. Problem 1. Iran. 7 American hostages were being held in Lebanon by groups loyal to Iran. The president had a personal obsession with bringing them home. But the US had an arms embargo against Iran, and Iran desperately needed weapons for its war with Iraq. Problem 2. Nicaragua. A left-wing government called the Sandinistas had taken power, and Washington wanted them gone. The CIA was backing a rebel group called the Contras to fight them. But Congress had passed a law, the Boland Amendment, specifically banning the government from funding the Contras any further. Two unrelated problems. Two legal walls the administration didn't want to accept. Then someone in the National Security Council had an idea that solved both problems at once, by breaking the law twice instead of once. Sell weapons to Iran, quietly, through Israel as a middleman. Use the money from those sales to fund the Contras, the exact thing Congress had just banned. 2 violations, 1 operation. They called it, internally, the enterprise. The man running the day-to-day operation was a National Security Council staffer named Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. North was a decorated Vietnam veteran with a reputation as a relentless, can-do operator. He believed completely in the cause, he saw the Contras as freedom fighters, and he was willing to bend or break almost any rule to keep them funded. Over more than a year, the operation shipped over 1,500 missiles to Iran. In exchange, a small number of hostages were released, and just as quickly replaced with new hostages taken by the same groups. The Secretary of State at the time called it, bitterly, a hostage bazaar. Meanwhile, the money from the Iran sales was being funneled to the Contras through a private network of arms dealers and shell accounts, deliberately structured to look like it had nothing to do with the US government. North even reached out personally to wealthy foreign donors for extra funding. In one case, he solicited $10 million from the Sultan of Brunei to keep the Contras supplied, and then somehow gave the donor the wrong bank account number, sending the money to a random Swiss businessman instead of the operation. Even the secret slush fund had typos. For over a year, this ran almost entirely outside of public view. Congress didn't know. Most of the State Department didn't know. Even the vice president would later claim he wasn't fully informed. Then, in October 1986, a cargo plane carrying supplies to the Contras was shot down over Nicaragua. The pilot survived, was captured, and started talking. The wall was starting to crack. On November 3, 1986, a Lebanese newspaper published the story. The US had been secretly selling weapons to Iran. For the next 10 days, the White House denied it. Flatly. Repeatedly. Then, on November 13th, the president went on national television and addressed the country directly. He admitted the US had been in contact with Iran, but insisted it was only a small, defensive arms shipment, nothing close to what was being reported. It wasn't true. By that point, over 1,500 missiles had already been shipped. 6 days later, in a press conference, he changed the story again, admitting to working with a particular group in Iran, without saying directly that this group had ties to terrorism. Then came the part nobody saw coming. The Attorney General discovered that millions of dollars from the Iran arms sales were unaccounted for. When investigators pulled the thread, it led straight to Oliver North and the Contras. The two scandals, the arms for hostages deal and the illegal Contra funding, were the same operation. Within days, North was fired. His boss, the National Security Advisor, resigned. And in the chaos of those final days before the truth came out, North and his secretary spent hours shredding and altering documents, trying to erase the paper trail before investigators could read it. They didn't get everything. One memo survived, a document outlining exactly how residual funds from the Iran sales would be diverted to the Contras. Investigators would later call it simply the diversion memo. It was the single piece of paper that proved the two halves of the scandal were connected. In the summer of 1987, Oliver North was summoned to testify before Congress, live, on national television. Nobody expected what happened next. North showed up in his full Marine uniform, medals on his chest, and testified for a week straight with total confidence. He admitted, on camera, that he had lied to Congress. He admitted to shredding documents. He even admitted to fabricating letters to cover his tracks, calling it the grossest misjudgment of his life. And somehow, none of it mattered to a huge chunk of the public. Instead of being seen as the man at the center of the cover-up, North became a folk hero. Newspapers called it Olimania. He received over 1 million pieces of fan mail. People held look-alike contests. Someone wrote a rock song about him. The uniform, the steady voice, the unwavering loyalty, it didn't read as guilt to a lot of viewers. It read as conviction. But the facts didn't change just because the television performance was compelling. 14 people were eventually charged in connection with the affair, including the Secretary of Defense. North himself was convicted on multiple felony counts. Almost all of those convictions were later overturned, not because the underlying facts were wrong, but on a legal technicality. North's congressional testimony had been broadcast so widely that the courts ruled it was nearly impossible to find witnesses whose testimony hadn't been influenced by watching it. In the final days of his presidency, President George H.W. Bush issued pardons to 6 of the remaining defendants, closing the door on any further prosecutions for good. To this day, it's still not entirely clear how much the president actually knew. Investigators concluded there was no smoking gun, no recorded order, directly tying him to the decision to divert the funds. But the same investigation also concluded that his disengagement from his own administration was exactly what allowed it to happen in the first place. Maybe that's the most unsettling part of this story. Not a single villain making a single evil choice, but a system where almost everyone involved could tell themselves they were doing the right thing. North believed he was protecting freedom fighters. The president believed he was bringing hostages home. Each justification, on its own, almost sounds reasonable. Stack enough reasonable-sounding justifications on top of each other, and you get an administration secretly selling weapons to a declared enemy to fund a war Congress explicitly banned, while shredding the evidence as fast as they could feed it through the machine. It is, even now, an oddly overlooked chapter in American history, overshadowed by Watergate before it and the decades since. If you want to go deeper into the stories history tried to bury, the next vault is already waiting. Subscribe, and I'll see you inside.